Explain like I'm 5. Why did the Europeans regard so highly the exotic spices from the Indies? I guess they have food texture and flavor. But why was that so important? They went to great lengths to acquire them and paid hefty prices for them. It was about status, really. In most courts, your standards of living reflected how powerful you were. If you could put exotic spices that your guests had never tasted before and that went for an insane price on your table, then everyone immediately knew you were likely very rich and powerful. I went to a store once that priced spice by the kilogram. It was an eye-opener. High value density means you can carry a lot of cash. In the Americas, on the other hand, you got lumber, fish, furs, tobacco, etc., which took more room in the hold for the same money. Actually, it kinda was the other way around. They didn't pay because they wanted them, but rather wanted them because they were expensive. Having spices at the table and on the food served was a way to show off. So you'll have people over and be like, look, I'm so rich, I have so many spices, and put them on everything regardless of price. When I was a teenager, my dad brought me back some Reebok pumps from a trip to America. My friends thought I was so cool for having these shoes, no one else did. Shoes, spices. America, Indies. Some spices were needed for conserving food. Many people had a very limited diet, eating the same thing over and over. Imagine eating unseasoned food for months after you tried seasoned food several times. Many spices are still luxury goods today. Saffron can be more expensive than gold by weight. You could pay a whole ship full of merchandise from Persia if you were carrying a box with saffron. I feel like everyone is refusing to give the answer they taste good. People value spices because spices taste good. You are used to all your food being heavily seasoned. But food is just actually better if you season it. I mean, they put paprika and garlic powder in Hot Pockets. Trust me, that cheap food would leave that stuff out if they could sell things without it. Spices are vital to food. 1. They're delicious and exotic. 2. There existed enough people willing to pay enough for the deliciousness that spending money, resources to travel to get them was a good business. It really isn't more complicated than that. 1. For preserving food. 2. Believing spices has usage as medicine. 3. For taste. 4. For luxury. 5. Due high demand and hard access. It is valuable to trade. Rarity increments the value of practically anything. Spices also had medicinal and food-preserving qualities hard to find in European substances. European spices like juniper and lavender don't store for nearly as long as many of the famous Eastern spices, so you can't have them year-round. In addition, European spices take more skill to cook correctly, while pepper takes no skill. A lot of it has to do with spices being the perfect item for profitable trade using transportation methods of the time. Profitable trade is all about taking something that is very common in one area and selling it at an area that is very rare. If you brought cedars from Lebanon to England so some rich guy could build a house, you would need a whole ship full to sell to one guy. But with spice, a little goes a long way. So you could fill your ship with spices and sell a meaningful amount to 10,000 different people in England. That is super profitable. 1. Covering the taste of old, decomposing meat. 2. Showing off about being rich. 3. They didn't have so much choice about what to eat back then. 4. In some countries for a long time till late Middle Ages, cooking was all about how it looked, how much of it was there, and how much spice was added. It made fresh meat last much longer, meaning you could sell it more. Much more. Also, try eating meat without any spices. It tastes much worse. There was a hermit at Russia who took his family into the woods and lived there for 20 years with No contact with the outside world. When asked what he missed about the normal life, the only thing he mentioned was salt. Because it turned the action of eating into a gluttonous sort of pleasure. Beyond merely sustenance-based food intake. Of all the vices of the ancient world, and even now, food is a vice anyone can partake, and one that you can partake for the rest of your life. Not to mention health benefits long term. Spices turned eating food into a vice. I also wonder that back then, without refrigeration, food spoilage would be way more common. So extending its life by a day or two with some spices makes sense. To add some emphasis here on one point, food before the spice trade was absolutely disgusting in some places in Europe. Bland, unrefrigerated. A lot of it spoiled, and vegetables didn't look quite like what we have today, where they've been bred to be big and awesome with lots of edible parts. If I ate shit like they did, I would also send someone else to conquer the world. European food, especially the UK's food, was bland hot brown before they discovered flavorful hot brown by using exotic spices. Have you tasted our bloody food? Also, the food back then wasn't fresh, so it did not keep well. So old meat tasted better with non-rotten stuff on it. People didn't have refrigeration, so their food always tasted spoiled. Spices cover that up. Many spices cannot be grown in colder climates. That's a huge part of it. They couldn't just grow things like cinnamon or nutmeg or even black pepper. They're tropical plants. Global taste is a relatively new concept. Even many herbs were difficult to get around the continent. Hot food and chocolate didn't exist until after trade with South America was established. Well after the Indian spice trade. Shipping spices was hard. They go bad quickly prior to proper sealing techniques. You can't get them wet. You can't grow them closer to Europe. On foot was crazy. It was something with immediate value, but could also be flaunted. Luxurious goods sell. Indigo, ivory, spices, or Swiss watches. It's the same. Or chocolate or tea. Food spoilage and quality were really poor in the past. Meat was dried in salt for preservation, and spice masked the bad smell and taste of rotten food. Sauces were also invented to mask the look and flavor of turned food. Because if you ate parsnips, beets, kale and oats, putting some cinnamon and vanilla in your oats was a massive change.